I prefer, of course, I would like to prioritize the questions that you may have. As I said before, uh, if you feel more confident making the question in Spanish, feel free. I can translate it. And speakers will be answering and discussing the questions. So I will just motivate the first question just for starting, and then uh, and then you can start with questions. And if there's a funeral silence in the room, I will keep on with the questions that I have prepared. So the first question that I think Camilo, in some way, he spoke about it, is what are the current theories of consciousness and how they define it. I think Camilo explained a little bit about that very fast, and I think that maybe you can extend a little bit more. And then just a quick question for all of you. Which one do you prefer? Just no scientific commitment. Your career is not at risk by answering this question. It's just that you can say what you prefer and why you prefer that. And if you don't want to reply, of course, perfectly okay. So does someone want to start? Camilo, you want to? If you want me to say which one? Yes, or maybe you want to give a more detailed explanation of what are the current theories or how they define it. I think many of us, when we see the word consciousness, we always ask, okay, but what is it? And how can we define it?
So maybe we'll try to make this a little bit more interactive as well.
Yeah.
So how many theories do you think that there are? Like, who would like to give a number? 10? 20? How much? 5. Eh, More? Less? 20? 30? As many as researching. So yeah, there are plenty. So I think like there is a recent paper that mentioned at least 100. Not all of them are scientific models of consciousness. There are a lot of mistakes in that paper, but my own, I mean, we are trying to quantify that as well with some colleagues, and I think like it's around that number anyway. And it could be even more because people just feel very, I mean, if you see how it works in consciousness science, it's not that difficult to come up with a model of consciousness. And if you mix between theories, models, and framework, then there are like plenty of, and plus hypotheses, then like there are as many as researchers, as you said. Saying that, of course, there are like a lot of commonalities between models, and they can be reduced to some of them that are actually compatible between them. I think like all of them are wrong, so I don't like any of them. But I feel I feel kind of sympathetic with what I call embodiment and inaction, but unfortunately they are not a model of consciousness per se, it's a model of cognition. So then it needs an extension in order to speak about subjective experience, and that extension is something that is under development. So yeah, that's I think like my answer. I can also say which one I don't like, but you can just check my papers and you will see.
Oh, same question. Yeah, I mean, I resonate very much. I mean, I find resonance as most Chileans present in the room, I guess, with an active approach in general. In the way that they do things, though, from their classical boats, I kind of like appreciate the way that IIT goes about it, I think, in terms of trying to really take seriously phenomenology. I have a bit more issues with the ontological sort of assumptions and the straightforward way of doing that. But I think in terms of how they do the work, I kind of admire that, which I think is kind of neglected in the other very popular things.
Yeah, I agree with Chris. I think my philosophical heart is with IIT. Like that's like more like a passional interpretation more than a scientific one. From the scientific perspective, actually, I'm really open to see. I'm like looking forward to see the debate and the results and so on. And with that said, for me, as a researcher in the area of consciousness, I think it can be a bit intimidating for some new researchers in consciousness to have like a position about the theories, and I don't agree with that. In my case, I don't have a strong position with the main theories, and although I don't have a strong position, I do consciousness research. So just like a general advice, I think sometimes it can be really intimidating, and that makes a lot of good researchers do not enter the consciousness area. And I think in the consciousness, as in the consciousness research, as Rubén and Camilo showed in the presentations, there are a lot of areas that you can take to study consciousness, computational, philosophical, so on. And some of those don't require a strong a theoretical position. So.
Thank you. As well, I do not have like a particular position. I'm very, I don't focus my research on consciousness itself, but I do think that there's one theory that it's not that I like it, but the like the integration information theory, which I think is wrong, like most of them. But at least there is something that strikes my attention, that is that there is something on the global, which is not on the parts. And I do think that the neural global dynamics and the interactions of neurons is not enough in order to explain the emergence of consciousness. So there should be something on the integration, but I don't know where in this part of the integration itself. So I think we should go in that direction.
Thank you very much. Yes, I will with the mic, maybe. My position is on the chair as moderator. No,
Oh, go. Okay. So I have a question regarding mental disorders, because I think most of the consciousness models try to aim somewhat in this direction of healthy subjects and try to analyze the comparison between the people with mental disorders and people without mental disorders. But also there's an interesting paradigm in mental disorders, which is what to say, is transdiagnosis of mental disorders. How do these theories account for that? And does they account? Yeah.
thank you. So is there someone waiting for knowledge for the question or discussion?
I don't have like specific knowledge about the transdiagnosis, but I could like try to say your second question, like, are these models targeting this type of phenomena? So I think like most of them, they don't. That's the thing. It's not like when I say like they're wrong, it's not like in the negative sense of it. It's like they are not targeting the full spectrum of the phenomenon. Then you can discuss, is that actually these models need to focus on these things or not? It depends on how big the claims of these models are. So if you have a specific models for specific things, then it's okay. But if some of these models claim to be theories and target always consciousness, so then they are not targeting these aspects as you mentioned, so then there is something that is fundamentally wrong in the theory. It's incomplete, at least. So without knowing exactly what is transdiagnosis, like having an intuition of what it is, I would say like most of them, they don't focus on this. But I may be wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's mostly because the consciousness theories, the question they try to answer is presence versus absence of consciousness. And I think the question of different mental health disorders is more about the changes in the contents of consciousness. Say. Now, it's still quite relevant and important to think about the ways in which you can have variability within the contents of consciousness to an extreme that has been not necessarily fully explained up until this moment. And I think ultrasounds of consciousness serve that sort of purpose of simulating a lot of these things. psychedelics at the beginning of the research were called psychotomimetic drugs, mimicking psychosis as a way to somehow develop models that can account for this variability in the contents of consciousness up to that point. So I think that's relevant. When it comes to the transdiagnostic criteria, I think it's interesting. I mean, what comes to mind, what I can say to that is that our categories of mental health disorders are very much rooted in clinical practice and being pragmatic about how to go about that. You know, if we look at the Camilo's diagram and subjective experiences, this fluffy thing, it's almost impossible to categorize with any form of certainty how different levels of experience interact. Are they dynamical? Are they sort of like dimensional or categorical? So forth. You know, the way that you just solve that in clinical practice is just putting boxes into things and then, you know, assigning different methods, advices for people who need different things, including drugs or treatments. But I do think that the transdiagnostic things tries to come back towards a more scientific approach to doing that sort of categorization by looking into the brain, the body, and these things that we can agree upon to try to define these things. And it could be that at some point, certain depression, psychosis that also show diminished levels of consciousness, like increased in mania, for example, also should maybe come into the discussion in consciousness research. And that's useful and maybe inspiring for consciousness research who also want to find some form of application beyond just sort of like an armchair position to understand.
I don't know if you are all collecting your own data, but if you are working with data set in general, how variable are between groups? You mentioned like a awareness model. Is the awareness group similar between them? Is it kind of different between them? I don't know. I don't know if you can control like what people eat, like the sport level, if they drink water or not. I don't know how that could be like a clean of the analysis. Makes sense, my question about the variability.
Yeah, actually, I don't collect data. I work with the data sets. And basically what we do is that we work at the group level. Unfortunately, I haven't like looked at the individual level, but we do look at the individual level of the subjective experience. And in that case, there's a lot of variability, and I think this can corroborate that.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we see a lot of variability from the starting point. Thinking about like the way that we do it, the address the variability, we have exclusion criteria. So we give drugs which have a strong impact on the mind, so we're careful about who we give things to, and we have a sort of inclusion criteria. And then we just recruit. And within there, you have a wide range of variability. We collect a lot of demographic data, personality variables, stuff like that. But don't incorporate it into the way that we analyze the data, because we can only do so much experiments and so many participants. When you're trying to find some sort of effect, you cannot really segregate them or partition them to specific groups. For that, I think you need a large grant, multi-site sort of thing to be able to do that. And that being said, I think it's absolutely fundamental. In psychedelic research, we're trying to understand these global states. We find that there's two diverging, like our lab kept finding the same thing over and over again. And then there's our competing lab that kept finding the inverse results from what we found. And so we said, okay, let's put our data together and see what's going on. And we indeed find that a small subset of our participants show their pattern. A small subset of their participants show our patterns. And so it's very plausible that that has to be starting.
Maybe also with the cultural aspect, because I bet that those are in the States and you're in.
Well, it could be, yeah. That would be fascinating. I mean, UK versus German, Swiss. Thank you very much. It was really rich experience. I'm glad to be here. Excuse my English, I'm sorry. But I'm just an idol so much about neuroscience because I'm just a biochemist that did his thesis on neuroscience. Expert. So briefly say something. My question is, why is the origin of consciousness in our brain? I mean, we have very basic stuff like we imagine things, we perceive them, emotions, most of them, we can make the thoughts of the brain perceived. But there's also some emotions that link it guts or hair. We aren't really humans or conscious, not only because we have a great microbiome that secretes serotonin, for example, that alters states of mind, for example, symptoms of depression are linked to some strains of microbes that are present in our guts. So, since we have this axis of brain, guts, hair, body, why do we focus on the origin of conscience? Since we have all of this, and also, sorry, for computer science, for example, we have now the entire brain of Sophia map the computer. How well is to study conscious using a computer model of the brain.
The brain Eurocentric paradigm in which we are now. There was some insights about it.
I'd like to answer, but we will read it.
Yeah, I can answer my perspective. Thank you for the question. I think it's really important to ask those type of questions. And there's a, like, in principle, there's like a historical perspective, right? We can think about the origin of the neuron. And it started with the neural doctrine, that all the fundamental particle, elemental particle of the brain was the neuron. And then we started developing, we can think about also as a history of technology as well, right? There were developments of technology that facilitated the simultaneous recording of multiple neurons, where we started to see that there were emerging properties that were not explained by each of its parts, and where's the neurons, and so on and so forth, including nowadays, simultaneous recordings of the brain and different organs, heart-brain connectivity, as you were saying, right? And I think that history of neuroscience and history of technology is always making confrontation with the actual paradigms that are in our discipline. And particularly right now, we can think about, for example, corticocentrism. It's not only the brain, but the brain also has the cerebellum, the brainstem, the thalamus, right? And all of the computational models right now are mostly focused on the cortical circuits, for example. Then there's the paradigm of connectivity. We are assuming connectivity, but for example, a couple of years ago, there was a really important paper talking about the geometry more than the connectivity to explain the functional properties of the brain. And then we can talk about like the cellular types, right? We are focused on neurons, but there are astrocytes, oligodendrocytes that modulate different parts of brain activity. So also another paradigm that I'm really interested in right now is the activity paradigm. We also always focused on brain activity and not, for example, brain energy supply, which is very important as well, and is modulated and is dynamic in time as well. So all of this like questions that you are asking right now are really important to start thinking about what is the future also of the research in science. Now, I didn't answer the question of consciousness specifically, but this I think it's part of the question you were doing.
Yes. Yes, I don't think that. Even now, we have now some new hypotheses that we have a brain microbiome, including the brain is not only star. That adds a lot more. This topic.
So just to complement, because I was about to say more or less the same. There are historical reasons why we try to find consciousness inside the brain, and it's kind of like I remember actually my interview to get into the program, the Master of Neuroscience here, and I remember like when they ask about the motivation, what is your motivation? And I say I want to understand the connection between the universe, the brain, and consciousness, and they say like, well, you probably just need the brain. And it was like, yeah, but there is something more. I cannot explain why from where there is this intuition that there is something more and it's not just the brain. And then you encounter like all this embodied cognition, and then you encounter like all the sociological perspective of consciousness as well. And then you just realize that it's not just the brain. So I think like we are turning into a more like, by the way, awareness that consciousness is not just in the brain. And I think like the reason why we focus so much is just a sociological reason and historical reason. Sociologically speaking, there is an important paper from Krieg and Carr, 2003. Before, yes, that they actually shaped all the research in the 30 years later of that paper, basically. No, sorry. Well, yeah, 93. It was 93. Sorry, that's and that's explained mainly why we have done this type of research. And you can see GNW, for example, it was cortex center, and now it's a cortex thalamus center. And that's why they changed. Well, they changed just because they saw evidence that thalamocortical loops were super important. That's a recent evidence. So at the end of the day, we kind of change where we are looking for consciousness because we are discovering new evidence and relationships that are being. And there are other researchers that now they're showing how sociological aspects, for example, impact as well in the perception and conscious experience. This is the work in Montreal, for example. I've seen very nice papers in the picture.
Gather several questions, and then the speakers will reply them in order to be able to collect many questions. So there will be, we will first listen to many questions, and then we will discuss around them.
Before asking the question, I want to bring back, so it's historical, but it's also lesion data, right? So what happens at some point is that, you know, people started gathering data where you hit this part of the brain and then you lose this function, right? So it's not only that, you know, we didn't make it up. You know, we came up with the idea because, you know, they resect FFA, you cannot see faces. Does that mean that FFA is what makes you to see faces, and that's a logical, you know, inference? But the fact is that we started with data. Right? It's not that we make it up. And of course, the fMRI with the nice pictures also tells you that, oh, you know, like this part lights up, and it's not that easy to light up something in the body. Right, so that's thing. I want to push you on, because you know you started with like what is the role of computational, what is the computational part, right? And I want to push you on things that you hinted at, but you didn't really touch on, which is like what are your computational stance? Meaning, do we need, is consciousness a function? Because if it is a function, then what? We'll explain it all. Not some, but all. Right? Now, if consciousness is not a function, and a functionalist, and a computation functionalism, then of course they won't, right? And if not, then which part are they missing?
Okay, so let's keep this question about your stance in order to also receive more questions about the audience, but keep that or maybe avoid that. You prefer? Okay, I have
two questions. One is very simple. To, how do you differentiate the relationship between the pharmacology and the experience in the patients? Because maybe for the depression, for example, because one is if the pharmacology, okay, the drug you're giving to the patients, and another is the experience of ego dissolution. What is the factor that affects the pathology? Because maybe it's not the pharmacology, it's the experience. I'm thinking maybe some people have some religious experience, and that is enough. No pharmacology, no drug, no psychedelics to recover his, I don't know, his mental health. That's the first question, only for you. Obviously, if you want to, any one of you can want to cooperate, it's welcome. And the second is something very interesting about consciousness is, for me at least, from the class I give, is about the relationship between awareness and ops. It seems it's two different components of consciousness, but they're linked. And if when you speak about consciousness, what you mean is only arousal, is only the content of this experience, or is both? It's very confusing, this distinction between these two components of what is when we talk about consciousness. Thank you.
Okay. I can have one. I don't remember the point of view of this history, because I was in the Francisco lab many years ago. 40 years ago, he was writing, and it was a study that the shell company asked to him, just to try to understand how the company was assimilated like a life structure that live and learn and just go to some places. And he finished with this book. This Spanish book is called Conocer. Actually, it was like a cartography, like a map of the cognitive science 40 years ago. And the first reaction of people at the time was that everyone was against. You know, every time that people put a map about technology, about science, about theory, is something that is generating crisis. You know? So this is very important to do that here, because I mean, it's the way that the social aspect of science move, you know, by theory, and you try something doesn't work, then and so on. I was liking very much this exercise of the putting evidence that there are many theories, as they would say. And I think because we are living in a world today that there are a huge expansion of the capacity of computers just to test everything that you imagine, you know, something like that. But my question is, this was a comment, just very fast. I was very intrigued by what you say about the experience of the psychedelic, in the sense that it's very normal. I mean, you use any drug, alcohol, or whatever, you destroy, I mean, the regularity of the way that you are like connected to the world. But what happens if you just, can you create a self in self just using drugs, the one that you are using? I mean, is possible to do a new self? Because this is a very question about the mechanism. If you can do that, that means that serotonin is one element of, right? Then you can also have a new experience, a new self, and then you can play. And that is very critical just to understand.
Okay, so by now, question of computational stance, the role of experience versus pharmacology, and the question awareness, also we talk about consciousness, and then this kind of experience can create or transform deeply ourselves. So one question is
Tiny one.
true about the.
No.
Okay.
No, but this is for all of you. Like, do you think only consciousness is a human thing, or is all species everything about bees or
So not human consciousness, put that in your
Yeah, thank you. First, thanks all of you. Those were wonderful presentations. Yeah, talking about the dissolution of the ego dissociation, dissolution, I don't remember. Yeah, I think shortly you, Christopher, showed a plot of the heart evoked response, and I think it disappeared in the presence of DMT or LSD. I'm not sure, but was that to be interpreted as a correlate of this ego dissolution of, and considering also the fact that I don't feel my heart all the time, like my subjective experience usually doesn't include my heart, but yeah, this ego dissolution thing seemed to take it out of the picture somehow. So how does one interpret that? I think it was very interesting. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, now for the sake of our memory, the last question, then coming back to the speakers, and then coming back to our
I'm going to cheat a bit and do two questions, which is essentially talking about in favor of two of the questions that have already been asked, but I want to reinforce them or phrase them a little bit different. One is her question. Instead of function, I would say, do you think that consciousness is a computation? And by that, I mean also substrate independent. So if the same computation is done by a different physical system, you would still have the experience? That would be my first question. Second question, I sadly don't have any experience or thing. So to envision consciousness possible without a sense of self. Is that possible? I mean, I don't know. I've never had it. That's it.
Okay, so now we're going back to the speaker. So the question is your stance regarding computation size. So experience versus pharmacology, arousal, awareness as dimensions of consciousness, the possibility of creating a new self, non-human consciousness. Yours was?
The disappearance of the heart evoked.
Yeah.
Yo, bienvenido. Invitando a una charla. Yo quería explicar algo que me ocurrió hace muchos años. Me llamo Guillermo y tengo 70 años. Y el año 39, o sea, tenía 22 años y nací en los 11 años. Por si alguien no me escuchó, me llamo Guillermo, tengo 78 años. Y yo quería contarles hace muchos años, tenía 22 años, ahora tengo 78. Yo trabajaba como electricista y me electrocuté. Y tuve una experiencia que no tiene explicación hasta ahora. No perdí la conciencia en ningún instante, pero tuve el shock de estar tocado en 220 voltios por mil. Y eso significa perder la noción del tiempo, una vibración muy intensa y un ruido sordo en los oídos, que puede ser el ruido de bote de la corriente externa. Pero bueno, yo pensé en librarme, separar el sistema. Y por esa que quiero, llegar a todas las funciones. De repente pasó la sensación de vibración, de ruido, silencio absoluto, oscuridad total, ingravidez. Me convertí en un punto. Algo que yo dije, es que sí. Y ¿qué pasa? Así que, bueno, la experiencia consciente, lo que uno recuerda, lo que uno piensa en claro. Así que el hecho es que después de un tiempo que no puede ser mucho, porque esta experiencia no puede ser mayor de 30 segundos, que uno está electrocutándose durante más de 30 segundos, queda con daño grave. No, no hubo testigos de esa experiencia. Pues yo, en una tontería, sabiendo los peligros que hay, me habían enseñado todo eso, hice un artefacto chifro y después de usarlo un rato, lo agarré mal. Saqué los guantes que estaba usando porque esto del kiki y había mucho calor en el marco había mucho calor y entonces yo estuve trabajando un rato y mi cuerpo obviamente que tiene que estar transpirado. Me agarro de esas cosas y empiezo con el problema. Y yo sé las consecuencias. Y bueno, el hecho es que ese punto que era yo en la oscuridad y estaba pensando que iba camino al cielo o a otro lado. Y yo tenía problemas con Dios en esa época, un problema, digamos, eh, era, había sido burlesco y ateo burlesco. ¿No? Entonces tenía un poquito y la experiencia no era. Bueno, ahí en la oscuridad, de repente sentí la sensación de movimiento. Y yo no sentí esto, pero sentí la aceleración. Idéntico a cómo se siente en el metro si uno cierra los ojos cuando está solo, sí, a las 6 de la mañana, y parte. Entonces, no hay ruido. Y uno siente que el movimiento es repelente. No vi ninguna cosa de las que he escuchado que la gente experimenta en las experiencias cercanas a la muerte, sino que después de avanzar un poco, supongo que avanzar hacia alguna parte, se empezó a ver una luminosidad muy tenue al principio y posteriormente empecé a visualizar una red. Y la red se veía empezar. Y la red estaba conformada por una, imagínense una red en el agua, oscilando. Y la red estaba conformada por una especie de tubo. Un tubo circular, como fluía una cosa. Un violeta claro, con destellos blanco, blanco, pero yo no sé qué clase de ojos tenía, pero veía eso. Y me iba acercando. Y, y bueno, cada vez cerca se estaba negro, a través de la red, pensé que si paso de esta red para el otro lado, ya no se me encuentra. Bueno, ahí hubo una experiencia, yo diría, que casi religiosa, porque la red. Y créanme que después de ese un diálogo interno, así que no hace promesas, sino que se convierte en verdad. Hay una transformación interna. Pero de repente, bruscamente, está ahí, volví al lugar donde yo estaba, mi cuerpo que estaba en el suelo, y todavía tenía la palabra en la mano, lo solté, y verifiqué que no hubiera ningún peligro de incendio. Y me fui hasta primera fila, esto que aquí en estaba en el centro, la calle Tabacado, 20, recuerdo. Era un edificio de madera, completamente. De manera. Yo pensé cuando estaba en el comienzo, esta cosa esto se va a quemar. Se va a quemar porque el cuerpo cuando se electrocuta, se quema. Y esto se va a incendiar. Y nadie va a saber qué pasó. Bueno, pero el hecho que me quedaron varias preguntas, ¿en qué estado se produjo? Porque no perdí la conciencia conmigo en ningún instante. Y después cuando averigüé de qué se trataba, cuando ya estuve más sereno y revisé al día siguiente y revisé qué pasaba, se había cortado un cable milagrosamente en el punto preciso para llegar a este final. Ah, ya, bueno, eso es todo. Yo creo que de ahí hay lugar a experiencias. Yo no sé si se han hecho experiencias con seres humanos que puedan, pero con la instrucción, digamos, qué es lo que pasa en el cerebro cuando se electrocuta por un segundo, un microsegundo. Si se controla el tiempo y se le da un choque eléctrico a una persona voluntaria. Bueno,
A mí me preocupa más la experiencia mística en todo caso.
mira la charla ética que hizo no había entendido nada, pero resulta que uno no se muere tan rápidamente cuando se empieza a electrocutar. En esta posición. Ahora en otra.
Ahí están los expertos.
En serio,
Ahí lo importante.
Sí. Sí. Okay, vamos a terminar en 15 minutos más. We're going to finish in 15 more minutes. And the last 15 minutes we will make it in Spanish. So pasamos a español. Decir también que una de las terapias más efectivas que hay actualmente que se hacen en Chile también para depresión, la terapia electroconvulsiva, que es también electrocutar de alguna manera, así que no es algo tampoco tan descabellado, probar con electricidad, estados de conciencia también y terapia. Bueno, pasamos entonces a las preguntas que teníamos pendientes.
¿Puedo elegir? Primero, agradecer, Guillermo, la experiencia. Me dejó pensando, la verdad es que lo que describía parece ser un estado alterado de conciencia de principio a fin, donde de alguna manera cuando explica que había un punto y donde él había dejado de ser, era lo que hablan los compañeros también, como de la disolución del ego, ¿cierto? Donde él está presente en la experiencia, pero probablemente había como una conciencia de lo que estaba sucediendo más allá de la propia persona, ¿cierto? Y que de alguna manera fue tan potente que lo llegó a pedir, a generar, a poder pedir perdón y convertirse. Así que si existe Dios, lo premió con hartos años más por su buen comportamiento. Y esto me deja pensar que en realidad, claro, y como enlazando con la pregunta tuya, ¿es necesario como algún tipo de sustancia para enlazar con la experiencia? Yo creo que no. Y yo creo que en este caso había como un cambio en la dinámica global radical inducida por un cambio eléctrico
30 segundos.
en 30 segundos. Heavy. Y volviendo al tema de las sustancias psicodélicas, por ejemplo, nosotros sabemos, y tal vez un poco reduccionista, pero que ellas son afines a los receptores de serotonina, que lo que hacen es que dependiendo de la densidad de receptores de un área, lo que hacen es cambiar o modular el nivel de excitabilidad generando un cambio a nivel global. Por supuesto que eso es una dosis alta, importante, que genera un cambio brutal, pero hay otras maneras también de inducir cambio, como son el estado psicodélico, o sea, como el estado meditativo, por ejemplo, que también generan unos cambios que no necesariamente son inducidos por sustancias. Creo que en hay como una reducción como de la conciencia que tal vez está dado como por el entorno o algo, pero que de alguna manera tal vez podríamos tener como algunas vías de poder modularlas que no necesariamente tiene que ver no con la sustancia en sí.
La pregunta que
Ya, también me sumo al agradecimiento voy a responder algo que tiene particularmente que ver con su historia, eso sí, que es la pregunta que hacía Sofía, y también conectándolo con la pregunta que hiciste, respecto a nuestra postura, o la postura que tenemos nosotros, ¿cierto? Respecto a la computación y si es que es reproducible la conciencia conociendo bien el algoritmo. Así decirlo. Yo creo que sí, yo creo que sí. Yo creo que por eso parcialmente también me dedico a la ciencia, ¿cierto? O sea, tengo la creencia de que falta por investigarlo, por supuesto. No creo que estemos ahora en la situación para poder reproducirlo algorítmicamente, pero creo que sí se puede llegar a eso. Y eso es lo que también me motiva mucho a seguir investigando, ¿no? Eso desde una perspectiva personal. Ahora, ¿cuáles son los desafíos que yo creo que existe para poder realmente reproducir bien eso? Yo creo que hemos estado bastante sesgados con los avances tecnológicos de la inteligencia artificial ahora, pensando que en verdad solamente es una cosa de dinámica, pero tampoco creo que nos olvidado también, y vuelvo un poco a lo que estamos insistiendo, que es como mi cabeza respecto a la parte metabólica y energética. O sea, una cosa que nos hemos olvidado es que el cerebro alcanza a producir suficiente energía como para prender una pequeña ampolleta de luz LED y necesitamos no sé cuántos servidores para poder reproducir un poco lo que está haciendo el cerebro momento a momento. Entonces, quizás en términos puramente computacionales pensamos que estamos cerca, pero en términos de optimización de flujo energético estamos y todavía no entendemos muy bien cómo eso emerge. Entonces, yo creo que eso no significa que no vamos a poder entenderlo bien, pero creo que es un bonito desafío para que pueda enfrentar una nueva generación de preguntas en el área de la conciencia que están relativamente poco exploradas, que tienen que ver con cambiar el uso de la energía cerebral y del cuerpo con respecto a conciencia y contenido de conciencia.
¿Estoy eligiendo o?
Si quieres, pues varios. No sé.
Eh, la farmacología versus la experiencia, el modelo que yo manejo y que la evidencia, digamos, lo sustenta un poco, es que efectivamente la cualidad de la experiencia predice las transformaciones en salud mental. O sea, experiencias de tipo mística, definidas de tipo mística, catárticas o de insight subjetivo, predicen disminuciones en síntomas depresivos, ansiosos y adicciones. Lo que sí creo es que se necesita un episodio gatillante, ya sea un electroshock dado por la electricidad, o un psicodélico que te altera, que genera una función, una plasticidad funcional muy, muy grande y tal vez plasticidad estructural muy grande, o una pérdida de conciencia per se. Hace poco salió un experimento donde daban ketamina a participantes que era subanestésica versus anestésica, y en ambos participantes bajaban también los síntomas depresivos. Entonces, yo manejo la idea de que se requiere un evento experiencialmente significativo que incluso puede ser ausencia de experiencia. O sea, una discontinuidad experiencial tan grande que puede llevar eventualmente a un cambio de apreciación de esa experiencia, no la experiencia en sí, sino lo que se juzga de la experiencia, lo que lleva al cambio. Incluso yo no creo que es el cambio en términos de salud mental es fenomenológico. Sí, yo creo que es como secundario a la fenomenología. Es como la gente hace sentido y significado de esa experiencia. Eh, y eso. Yo me considero, no me considero funcionalista computacionalista. Yo resueno harto con lo que dice Thompson, que la idea de la computación y la información son constructos, abstracciones humanas, eh, que de alguna forma nosotros hemos inventado y que nos sirven para entender las cosas, pero que es una hipótesis, digamos. Entonces, como que creo que nos falta evidencia para yo necesariamente. ¿Y cómo responder después de eso? No. La transformación del self, yo creo, bueno, depende de qué parte del self yo creo que es posible. O sea, como acá un ejemplo muy claro, digamos, donde hay partes identitarias o del concepto de uno que yo creo que es posible transformar en algún grado. Yo creo que como seres humanos en desarrollo estamos siempre en cambios del self. Y hay evidencia desde un punto de vista de personalidad también que muestran una variación medida que envejecemos en el desarrollo. Entonces, yo creo que los eventos significativos en la vida, puede ser una experiencia psicodélica, una experiencia cercana a la muerte, u otras, son capaces de transformar aspectos de lo que podríamos conseguir como sexo. ¿Qué aspectos del sexo son los que cambian? Si es posible una experiencia sin un self o sin un yo dudo bastante de esa posibilidad. Yo creo que lo que o sea, se disminuyen aspectos o cambian muy drásticamente aspectos del self, pero yo soy más de me hace mucho sentido la idea de que los aspectos constitutivos de la experiencia tienen que ver con aspectos afectivos bien básicos, como lo que se llama core self. Y que yo creo que sin esa afectividad, creo que es muy difícil que haya experiencia. Entonces, todas las que me acuerdo.
Gracias.
Qué interesante el cambio. Como que mi mente tiene que cambiar también. Eh, me gustaría responder o comentar un poco el tema que mencionaba Lucía, de hecho, sobre los datos que nos hacían o que nos hacen pensar que el cerebro juega un rol importante. Yo sigo pensando que eso tiene que ver con un fenómeno histórico y social, porque el dato en sí mismo no dice nada, a ser de que lo interpretamos como un dato. Entonces, el hecho de que hubiesen lesiones y todo eso es dentro de un contexto bastante antropocéntrico, en el que se subentendía que en ese tiempo también que el ser humano era el único ente consciente. Y yo creo que la misma investigación y nuevos datos también, con un diferente contexto social, nos hace entender ahora que no, que hay otros animales que también son conscientes, que son probablemente conscientes en una manera totalmente distinta que la nuestra. Y eso extiende a sistemas que pueden ser de inteligencia artificial o cualquier otro, que puedan ser conscientes de una manera diametralmente distinta a la nuestra. La pregunta es, ¿seremos capaces de distinguir eso o no? Y ahí es donde yo no soy un funcionalista computational, o un poquito como Chris, no me la compro tan fácil, con el computacionalismo pero también soy fenomenologist, o sea, sigo la filosofía de Husserl, Merleau-Ponty, etc. Y básicamente, si uno sigue más o menos esos principios, tiene que ser agnóstico con respecto a la posibilidad de que exista o que no exista. Tú, brackets, se dice, entre comillas, tus propias suposiciones. Entonces, mi suposición es que la biología juega un rol importante en la conciencia. Esa biología no es necesariamente solo el cerebro, esa biología puede ser relacionada con la energía, el metabolismo, esa energía, esa biología puede estar relacionada también con sistemas celulares, no lo sé. La suposición es que la biología es importante, lo pongo entre comillas, y veamos qué es lo que los datos nos cuentan. Lamentablemente, cualquier historia va a estar basada en el contexto social. Ahora existen, por ejemplo, un montón de grupos que dicen, bueno, no sé, cierta cantidad de animales, bla, 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 son conscientes. Y aproximamos el estudio de Animal Consciousness de una forma distinta. Ahora, no es que tenemos que validar que estos animales son conscientes, tenemos que falsificar que estos animales no son conscientes. Y te cambia directamente la forma de hacer ciencia. Y lo mismo puede pasar con otra perspectiva sobre la conciencia, y por eso nuevamente el hecho de entender las distintas disciplinas y cómo estamos pensando. Y para finalizar con lo de la computacionalidad, Turing, que fue el padre de la computación moderna, cuando él escribe su libro, en el libro dice, como, en su libro él habla de, eventualmente quizás estas computaciones se podrían parecer a cómo el cerebro funciona. O sea, la inversión era, el computador se va a parecer al cómo el cerebro funciona. Y actualmente, varios años después, nosotros hemos invertido esa explicación y ahora es, el cerebro funciona como un computador. Es una inversión lógica que Turing no estaba proponiendo cuando él comenzó con su teoría de la computación. También hay que entender desde una visión computacional que existen muchas distintas formas de computación analógica, digital, son solamente dos grandes familias, pero hay muchas distintas. La computación cuántica es otra que no es ni siquiera computacional en el término clásico de la palabra. Entonces, ahí ya, como que hay mucho que decir. Eh, sorry. Vale.
Bueno, por el tiempo nosotros tenemos que dejar la sala acá a las 6 para que el depositorio sea todo. Así que bueno, con esto agradecemos primero a los speakers por haber dado esta charla. Gracias a la Ateneo, también a Fundación Eco y Luz Edwards que hizo los flyers y todo, y gracias a todos ustedes por venir. Que tengan buena tarde.